Commander James Chen stood in the massive throne room of Meridian Prime and felt small for the first time in his military career. The walls stretched upward into darkness, and the floor beneath his boots looked like polished obsidian that reflected the strange purple light from the alien suns outside. He had traveled 3 months through jump gates to reach this planet, and now he understood why 12 diplomats before him had failed. Queen Vladimir sat on her crystalline throne, and she was enormous. Her body rose at least 12 feet tall, covered in black chitinous armor that gleamed like wet stone. 4 arms crossed over her chest, and each hand ended in claws that could probably tear through steel. Her head resembled an insect, but her eyes were disturbingly intelligent as they studied him with what looked like amusement. Behind her stood hundreds of Velaran warriors, and they filled the chamber with constant clicking sounds that made Chen's teeth hurt. The human stepped forward and tried not to think about how easily these creatures could kill him. The Galactic Council had sent him because the Velarans were preparing to invade human colony worlds, and every previous negotiator has been dismissed as weak. The Insectoid Empire controlled 3 star systems through fear and military power, and they believed humans were just another soft species to be conquered. Chen held up his credentials, but Valara waved one massive hand dismissively. Her voice came through translation devices, and it sounded like grinding metal. Another human comes to beg for peace. Your kind always begs. You wear your little armor suits and pretend to be strong, but we know the truth. Soft flesh, weak bones. You cannot even breathe our air without technology. The human diplomat took a slow breath and decided that careful words would not work here. The Velarans respected only strength, and he needed to make them understand what humans really were. Your Majesty makes assumptions. We wear armor for your comfort, not ours. The clicking sounds intensified, and several warriors moved forward, but Valara raised her hand to stop them. Her eyes narrowed, and Chen saw interest there along with the contempt. Explain yourself, human, before I have you removed. Chen began unfastening his ceremonial armor, and the throne room went silent. Humanity evolved on a death world called Earth. We survived ice ages that froze our continents. We survived volcanic winters that blocked out our sun. We survived asteroid impacts and plagues and predators that hunted us for millions of years. We learned to adapt to every extreme. He removed his chest plate and set it on the floor. We don't need technology to survive hostile environments. We just need time to adjust. Queen Valara leaned forward on her throne, and her massive form created shadows that swallowed Chen completely. Bold words from a creature I could crush with one hand. You claim humans need no protection, but I see no evidence of this legendary resilience. The human smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. Then test me. Give me a challenge that proves human capability, and I will accept it right now. The Velaran queen studied him for a long moment, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. Finally she spoke, and her voice carried across the chamber. Very well. Our southern wastelands are considered uninhabitable even by our warrior caste. The temperature swings from boiling at midday to freezing at night. Toxic storms strip flesh from bone. Radiation from our binary suns kills most organic life within hours. Survive 1 rotation there, and I will consider your request for negotiations. Chen nodded immediately. I accept, Your Majesty, but I request permission to remove all my armor to prove humans. Require no artificial assistance. The clicking sounds erupted into what might have been laughter and Several warriors slapped their claws together in mocking applause. Valara's expression remained unreadable, but Chen thought he saw something shift in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe just anticipation of watching another arrogant human die. Granted, the queen said, but I am adding one condition. My youngest daughter, Princess Kira, will observe and document your death. She is training to lead our military forces, and watching soft species fail will teach her valuable lessons about weakness. A smaller Velaran stepped forward. From behind the throne, and Chen guessed, she was about 8 feet tall with armor that gleamed silver instead of black. Her eyes were brighter than her mother's, and when she looked at Chen, he saw intelligence without the layer of contempt. I will observe the human closely, mother. Kira said, and her voice sounded younger through the translators. "This will be educational." Chen met her gaze and nodded. "I look forward to teaching you, Princess. Perhaps you will learn something different than what your mother expects." The throne room exploded with angry clicking, and several warriors moved toward Chen, but again Valara raised her hand. The queen stood from her throne and descended the steps until she towered directly over the human diplomat. "You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Tomorrow at dawn, you will be transported to the Wasteland Plateau. I suggest you make peace with whatever gods humans worship." Chen smiled up at the massive alien queen. "Humans learned a long time ago that we are our own gods, Your Majesty. We survive because we refuse to surrender, no matter how impossible the situation appears." Valara stared down at him, and for just a moment Chen thought he saw something other than contempt in those alien eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition of something familiar and dangerous. Then the moment passed, and the queen turned away. "Take him to the preparation chambers," Valara commanded. "And make sure Princess Kira has full recording equipment. I want detailed documentation of what happens when arrogance meets reality." Guards surrounded Chen and led him from the throne room, but he caught one last glimpse of Princess Kira, watching him with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been pity. He could not tell which, and decided it did not matter. In less than 24 hours, he would either be dead or he would have changed everything the Velarans believed about humanity. The human diplomat was escorted through corridors of black stone toward his final night of preparation. Outside the palace windows, the alien suns were setting and painting the toxic sky in shades of orange and purple. Chen watched the light show and thought about Earth. He thought about all the humans who had survived impossible. Odds and all, the ancestors who had refused to quit, even when extinction seemed certain. Tomorrow, he would show the Velarans what human resilience really meant. Tomorrow, he would take off his armor and walk into their nightmare landscape. And tomorrow, Princess, Kira would learn that sometimes the most dangerous creatures are the ones who look the weakest. Part 2. The Wasteland Walk. The transport ship dropped Chen onto the Wasteland Plateau. Just as the first sun crested the horizon and he felt the temperature spike immediately, the Velaran guards watched from the ramp as he stripped off his remaining protective gear until he wore only basic clothing and simple boots. Their clicking sounds suggested they were taking bets on how long he would survive. Princess Kira's observation vessel hovered 100 meters away, and Chen could see her through the transparent viewing port. She was broadcasting everything to the royal court, and he imagined Queen Valara watching with her warriors, expecting entertainment. The transport lifted off and left him alone on the cracked red earth. Chen looked around at the hostile landscape and catalogued the threats. Rocky outcroppings provided minimal shade. Strange purple vegetation clung to life in the crevices. The air tasted metallic and burned his throat on the first breath, but his body would adjust. Everything was exactly as hostile as the Velarans had promised. The second sun rose within minutes, and the temperature climbed toward levels that would kill most species. Chen felt sweat beginning to form and knew his body was already working to cool itself through evaporation. He found a cluster of rocks that had mineral deposits on the surface and scraped off a handful of white powder. Mixed with his sweat, it formed a paste that he spread across his exposed skin. The minerals would reflect radiation and provide basic protection, while his body adapted to the elevated levels. In Kira's observation vessel, the princess watched with growing confusion. Her scanning equipment showed no hidden technology on the human, but he was moving calmly through radiation that should have been killing him. She increased the magnification and watched Chen's skin turning red from exposure, then slowly returning to normal as his body adjusted. The biological response was fascinating and completely at odds with what she had been taught about soft species. Chen walked steadily across the wasteland and ignored the pain of adjustment. His skin would burn and heal and burn again until his melanin production increased. His body would lose water through sweat, and he would need to find sources to replace it. Every system in his body was working at maximum capacity to maintain homeostasis in an environment designed to kill him. This was what humans had evolved to do. The toxic storm hit around midday, and Kira expected it to be the end of the human experiment. The winds carried particles that could strip flesh from bone and the airborne. Chemicals were caustic enough to melt most organic materials. She watched Chen wrap cloth around his face and keep walking as if he were strolling through a park instead of a death zone. Her instruments showed the chemicals were making contact with his skin and causing burns, but the human's body was already producing mucus and oils that neutralized the worst effects. His eyes were watering constantly to flush out particles, and his respiratory system was filtering the toxic air through layers of natural defense. Kira found herself leaning closer to the viewing port, forgetting to provide commentary for the royal court. The storm passed after 2 hours, and Chen stopped to rest in the shadow of a large rock formation. He was hurt and exhausted, but still alive, and that should have been impossible. Kira's training told her that soft species required constant technological support, but everything she was observing contradicted that fundamental assumption. Night fell rapidly and brought the temperature down from boiling to freezing in less than an hour. Kira expected the human to finally succumb to hypothermia. Instead, she watched him gather dried vegetation and create fire using nothing but friction and patience. The primitive technique took him nearly 20 minutes, but eventually smoke appeared and then flames. Chen built up the fire and sat close to absorb the heat while his body shivered to generate more warmth internally. Kira's observation vessel began experiencing problems as the night progressed. The atmospheric storms that meant nothing to the human were playing havoc with her shielding systems. Warning lights flashed across her control panel, and she realized her power systems were being drained too quickly. She had allocated too much energy to weapons and scanning equipment, and not enough to environmental protection. The vessel lurched sideways in a powerful gust, and Kira fought the controls as multiple systems failed. She was going to crash, and her armor would not be enough to save her in this environment. Fear tasted bitter in her mouth, and she prepared to send a final transmission to her mother. Then she saw movement through the viewing port. The human was climbing the rock formation toward higher ground, and he was creating patterns with burning vegetation. It took Kira a moment to realize he was signaling her with fire, and the patterns were instructions. Redirect power from weapons to shields. Reduce scanning to minimal. Increase altitude gradually. She followed his guidance, and her vessel stabilized just before complete system failure. Kira stared down at Chen, who was standing on the rocky peak with flames surrounding him like some primitive god. He had saved her life, and there was no logical reason for him to do that. She opened a communication channel. "Why did you help me, human?" "I was sent to document your death." Chen's voice came through rough from the toxic air, but steady. "Because you needed help, princess. Humans define strength not through domination, but through choosing when to fight and when to protect. You were not my enemy in that moment. You were just someone in danger." Kira had no response to that. Her entire culture was built on the idea that strength meant crushing enemies and showing no weakness. The concept of helping someone who was sent to witness your failure was completely alien too. Valoran thinking. The second day brought acidic rain that fell from the purple sky in sheets. Kira watched Chen collect the rain in makeshift containers and then use it to extract minerals from rocks. He created a shelter using the dissolved minerals as a bonding agent and explained through the communication channel that human skin had evolved to handle extreme pH variations. His body was producing oils and proteins that neutralized the acid on contact. "Your species is adapted for a paradise world," Chen said as he worked. "You evolved where everything was easy, so you needed technology to survive anywhere else. Humans evolved where everything tried to kill us, so we learned to adapt to any environment. Neither approach is wrong, princess. They are just different." Kira found herself asking questions instead of just recording. She wanted to understand how human evolution had created such resilience and why his species bothered with diplomacy when they could simply outlast any threat. Chen answered patiently and explained that humans had learned that cooperation was more efficient than conflict. "Can survive almost anything," he said. "But surviving alone is hard, and surviving together is easier." That's why we build alliances instead of empires. That's why I am here talking to you instead of just enduring this wasteland in silence." By the third day, Kira had stopped reporting to her mother entirely. She was supposed to be documenting human weakness, but instead, she was learning that weakness and strength were more complicated than she had been taught. The human was covered in burns and injuries, but he was still moving and still thinking and still teaching her about a completely different approach to survival. Chen completed his rotation trial early and stood at the extraction point, waiting for the transport. When Kira's vessel descended to collect him, he looked up at her viewing port and smiled through the dried blood and burns on his face. "I have a proposal, Princess," he said. "Instead of just documenting what I survived, let me teach you how humans turn hostile environments into advantages. Your people are afraid of species like mine because you think adaptation means aggression. I want to show you that adaptation can mean cooperation." Kira stared down at the human who should have been dead a dozen times over and made a decision that would change everything. "I accept your proposal, Commander Chen, but I warn you that my mother will not be pleased with what I have learned." Chen laughed, and the sound was rough but genuine. "Then we will teach her together, Princess. Sometimes the hardest part of negotiation is not proving you are strong. It is proving that strength can take many forms, and some of the strongest things are the ones that bend instead of break." Part 3. The Princess Studies Humanity. Kira brought Chen back to the palace in her observation vessel and requested an immediate audience with her mother, but not to report his death. The princess wanted permission to study human physiology further, and she claimed it was necessary for military intelligence. Queen Valara agreed because she assumed her daughter would eventually expose critical human weaknesses that could be exploited in the coming invasion. The medical facilities were located in the lower levels of the palace where Velaran scientists conducted research on alien biology. Chen stood in the center of a white chamber while dozens of insectoid researchers gathered around with scanning equipment and recording devices. They clicked excitedly among themselves, and Chen recognized the sound as scientific curiosity rather than hostility. Kira directed the demonstrations personally, and her approach was methodical. She wanted documentation of every human capability that contradicted standard Velaran assumptions about soft species. The first test involved light spectrum adaptation, and Chen stood under lamps that cycled through wavelengths from infrared to ultraviolet. The scientist watched his pupils contract and dilate automatically. They measured his perception of colors that should have been invisible to organic eyes. They documented how his visual cortex processed information across a broader spectrum than most species, including Velarans. One researcher clicked in amazement and announced that human eyes were designed for a planet with constantly changing light conditions. Chen explained that Earth rotated through day and night cycles and that human ancestors had evolved to hunt and gather in both bright sunlight and near darkness. His eyes were tools shaped by millions of years of adaptation to environmental variation. The Velaran scientists recorded everything, and several of them began clicking in what sounded like academic debate. The next test exposed Chen to Meridian Prime's native pathogens. The medical staff introduced bacterial and viral samples that typically hospitalized or killed alien visitors within hours. They took blood samples every 30 minutes and watched in stunned silence as Chen's immune system identified and destroyed the threats with brutal efficiency. Kira leaned over the analysis displays and tried to understand what she was seeing. The human body was producing antibodies and deploying white blood cells that adapted their attack strategies in real time. His immune system was not just defensive, but actively learning from each new pathogen and creating permanent defenses against future exposure. How is this possible? One scientist asked through the translators. Most species require technological assistance to fight unknown diseases. Your body is doing in hours what should take genetic engineering and pharmaceutical intervention. Chen smiled, and the expression seemed to unsettle some of the researchers. Humans evolved alongside millions of different pathogens on Earth. Our immune systems learned to be paranoid and aggressive because anything less meant death. We get sick, but our bodies remember every illness and prepare for the next one. It makes us hard to kill with biological weapons. The temperature regulation demonstration came next, and it was perhaps the most dramatic. The scientists placed Chen in a climate chamber and cycled the temperature from well below freezing to well above boiling. They expected his body to fail at the extremes, but instead they documented an organism that was almost obscenely good at homeostasis. When the temperature dropped, Chen began shivering violently, and his body generated heat through muscle contractions. His metabolism increased, and his circulatory system prioritized, keeping his core organs warm at the expense of his extremities. When the temperature spiked, his sweat glands activated and covered his skin with moisture that evaporated to cool him. His blood vessels dilated to release heat, and his breathing increased to expel warm air from his lungs. Kira watched the readings and realized that human bodies were constantly making thousands of tiny adjustments to maintain internal stability regardless of external conditions. It was like watching a biological machine that had been engineered for survival on a planet that could not decide what environment it wanted to provide. "Your species is terrifying," one of the older scientists said, and the translator made it sound like a compliment. "You evolved to survive anywhere, which means you can live anywhere. No wonder your kind spreads across the galaxy so easily." But the demonstration that truly changed how the Velerans viewed humans came when Chen volunteered to spar with their warriors. Kira arranged for 3 of her mother's best fighters to engage the human in unarmed combat, and the scientists set up recording equipment around the training arena. The Veleran warriors were each 9 feet tall, with natural armor plating and 4 arms that ended in claws. They had been trained since birth in combat techniques, and they looked at Chen with the kind of confidence that comes from never losing a fight. The humans stood across from them in simple clothing and looked fragile by comparison. The fight began, and Chen moved in ways that should not have been possible for a creature his size. He was not faster than the Velerans or stronger, but he was unpredictable. When the first warrior lunged with all 4 arms, Chen dropped low and swept the legs, which sent the massive fighter crashing down. When the second warrior tried to grab him, Chen twisted in a direction that should have dislocated his joints, but instead gave him leverage to throw his opponent off balance. The third warrior was more cautious and tried to use reach advantage, but Chen closed distance by accepting minor hits to land major strikes. He targeted joint weaknesses in the Veleran armor and used the fighter's own momentum against them. Within 5 minutes, all 3 warriors were on the ground, breathing hard and staring up at a human who was barely winded. Kara descended from the observation platform, and her voice carried a mix of shock and respect. "How did you do that? They are bigger and stronger and have 4 arms. You should not have been able to defeat even one of them." Chen helped the first warrior stand, and the Veleran accepted his hand with obvious reluctance. "Humans don't win fights through superior attributes, Princess. We win through adaptation and unpredictability. Your warriors are trained for specific combat scenarios, but I grew up on a world where every predator hunted differently and every environment required different survival strategies. I learned to improvise." He turned to address all the gathered scientists and warriors. "My species evolved to be generalists, not specialists. We can't fly like some aliens, or breathe underwater like others, or see in complete darkness like your kind. But we can learn to do almost anything given enough time and motivation. That makes us dangerous in ways that pure strength or speed never could." The demonstrations continued for days, and Kira compiled reports that grew increasingly concerning from a military perspective. Chen showed them human endurance by running for hours without stopping. He showed them human pain tolerance by calmly enduring injuries that would have incapacitated Velerans. He showed them human problem-solving by escaping from elaborate containment scenarios using nothing but creativity and persistence. But he also taught Kira about human culture and philosophy, and these lessons were perhaps more important than the physical demonstrations. They sat together in her private quarters while she reviewed the data, and he explained why humans approached the galaxy so differently than Velerans. "Your people evolved on a paradise world," Chen said while examining a holographic display of the Veleran homeworld. "Everything was abundant and easy. Then hostile aliens came and almost destroyed your entire civilization. That trauma shaped your culture into what it is now, because you learned that you needed technology and military power to never be vulnerable. Again, Kira's mandibles clicked softly, and Chen had learned to recognize it as a sign of discomfort. You researched our history? That information is not widely shared outside the military caste. I did my homework before coming here, Princess. But my point is that humans have a different trauma. We evolved on a death world where everything tried to kill us all the time. Predators and diseases and climate shifts and natural disasters. We survived not by becoming invulnerable, but by becoming adaptable. Our trauma taught us that there's no such thing as perfect safety, so we might as well cooperate with others instead of trying to control everything through force. Princess was quiet for a long moment, and Chen could see her processing ideas that contradicted everything she had been taught. Finally she spoke, and her voice was softer than usual. My mother fears your kind Commander Chen. She will not admit it publicly, but I have seen it in how she speaks about humans. She sees your adaptability and your spread across colony worlds, and it reminds her of the aliens who nearly destroyed us. That is why she plans to invade before you become too strong. Chen nodded because the pieces were finally falling into place. Then we need to help her understand that humans are not those ancient enemies. We adapt, but we also cooperate. We spread, but we also share. We could be your greatest allies instead of your next conquerors, but only if she can see past her fear. Kira stood and paced across her quarters in the way that Velerans did when they were agitated. The invasion fleet is already preparing to launch. My mother has given them orders to begin operations within days. Even if I present all this evidence, it may not be enough to change military policy that has been months in planning. The human stood as well, and his expression was serious. Then I need to speak to your mother again. One final demonstration that proves humans value cooperation over conquest. But this time I need you to stand with me, Princess. Show her that even a Velaran warrior can learn something from soft species. Kira looked at Chen and realized she was facing a choice that would define her future. Support this human and contradict her mother's fear, or remain silent and watch the Velaran Empire make a mistake that might destroy them. She thought about everything she had learned in the past days and made her decision. I will stand with you, Commander Chen, but I warn you that my mother's fear runs very deep. And fear makes people do terrible things even when they know better, especially when they know better. Part 4. The Queen's True Fear Queen, Valara granted. Chen, a final audience, but the atmosphere in the throne room was very different from his first visit. The assembled warriors were tense, and their clicking sounds carried an aggressive edge. Word had spread about the human who survived the wastelands and defeated their best. Fighters and the military caste viewed him as a threat rather than a curiosity. Chen walked to the center of the chamber with Princess Kira beside him, and he carried data. Tablets containing all the research from the past week. The queen sat on her crystalline throne looking larger and more intimidating than ever, and her forearms were crossed in a posture that suggested the audience would be brief. My daughter tells me you wish to present evidence, Valara said, and her translated voice echoed through the chamber. Speak quickly, human. The invasion fleet launches at dawn, and I have preparations to oversee. Chen activated the holographic displays, and images filled the air above the throne room floor. Pictures of Earth appeared, showing a blue and green planet that looked deceptively peaceful from space. Then the images shifted to show ice ages and volcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts and mass extinctions. This is where humanity comes from, Your Majesty. A world that tried to kill us in every way possible across millions of years. We survived ice that covered entire continents. We survived volcanic winters that blocked out our sun. We survived asteroid impacts that destroyed most life on the planet. We did not run away to easier worlds. We stayed and adapted until we became the dominant species on a death world. The holographic images showed human history in rapid succession. Stone Age hunters tracking prey across frozen landscapes. Agricultural societies learning to grow food in hostile climates. Industrial civilizations rebuilding after wars and natural disasters. Space-age humans finally leaving Earth but carrying with them all the adaptations that made them survivors. We could have fled to paradise worlds, Chen continued. The galaxy has thousands of planets easier than Earth. But we chose to stay and learn from our death world. It taught us resilience and cooperation and the stubborn refusal to surrender no matter how impossible the situation appears. That is what makes humans dangerous, Your Majesty, but not in the way you fear. Queen Valara leaned forward, and her massive form created shadows across the throne room floor. Dangerous is dangerous, human. You demonstrate adaptation and resilience, which means you will eventually spread across the galaxy and threaten our territory. Better to eliminate the threat now before you become unstoppable. Chen took a deep breath and made a decision that would either save his mission or end his life. He began removing his remaining armor piece by piece, while the entire court watched in shocked silence. He removed his jacket and shirt until he stood bare-chested in the center of the throne room with every scar visible. You want to see what humans really are? Chen's voice was steady and calm. Then look at me without the barriers. I have scars. From combat and scars from accidents and scars from diseases that almost killed me. Every mark on my body is a lesson I learned and a challenge I survived. Humans don't hide our scars, Your Majesty. We wear them as proof that we can endure and adapt and keep going, no matter what the universe throws at us. The throne room erupted in clicking sounds that ranged from outrage to fascination. Several warriors moved forward as if to physically remove Chen, but Kira stepped between them, and her voice cut through the noise. I have studied this human for days and learned things that contradict everything we believe about soft species. His scars are not weaknesses to be hidden. They are evidence of survival strategies we cannot comprehend because we evolved so differently. Queen Valara raised one massive hand, and the warriors stopped advancing but remained tense. The queen stared down at Chen, and something shifted in her expression. For a long moment, there was only silence in the throne room, broken only by the sound of Chen's breathing. Then Valara spoke, and her voice was different, quieter, more personal. You stand before me and show your vulnerability as if it were strength. You challenge me to see past your soft exterior to the survivor beneath. Very well, human. I accept your challenge. The queen rose from her throne and descended the steps, and every warrior in the chamber went completely still. Valara reached up to her own armor and began removing the ceremonial pieces that she had worn for decades. The chest plate came off first, revealing scarred chitin beneath. The arm guards followed, and then the leg armor until the Queen of Meridian Prime stood. Before her court, in just her natural body, Chen heard Kira's sharp intake of breath and understood the significance of what was happening. Valara's body was covered in old scars from wounds that should have been fatal, long claw marks across her torso, and burn patterns on her arms and what looked like puncture wounds that had healed badly across her lower abdomen. These were scars from the ancient war that nearly destroyed the Velaran species, and she had hidden them for all the years of her reign. The throne room remained absolutely silent, and Chen saw vulnerability in the alien queen's eyes for the first time. She was not just a warrior or a ruler, but a survivor of trauma that had shaped her entire civilization's approach to the galaxy. You are right, human, Valara said quietly. I fear your kind. I look at your adaptation and your spread across colony worlds, and I remember the aliens who came to my paradise world when I was young. They were also adaptable and unpredictable, and they slaughtered my people by the billions before. We learned to fight back with technology and military force. Your species reminds me of them, and that terror drives every decision I make about human colonies. Chen walked slowly toward the queen until he stood directly before her, and the size difference was enormous, but the moment felt equal. I cannot change what happened to your people, Your Majesty. That trauma is real and valid, and it shaped who you became. But humans are not those ancient enemies. We adapt, but we also cooperate. We survived our death world not through conquest, but through working together against common threats. He gestured at his scars, and then at hers. We both carry marks from surviving the impossible. But there is a difference between surviving alone and surviving together. Humans learn that working with other species makes us stronger and safer. We could teach Velerans the same thing if you would let us. An alliance between our peoples would combine your technology with our adaptability and create something more powerful than either of us alone. Valara stared at Chen, and her expression was conflicted. You speak of cooperation, but my military caste demands action. They see weakness in negotiation and strength in conquest. The invasion fleet is ready, and my commanders expect orders to launch. If I cancel the operation, they will question my leadership and possibly challenge my position.
Before
Chen could respond, a massive Velaran warrior stepped forward from the ranks, and his armor marked him as a high-ranking officer. His voice boomed through the throne room with barely contained aggression. I am Lord Thexus, commander of the invasion fleet. I have listened to this human speak his soft words, and I am not convinced. The military caste does not accept alliance with species that lack warrior tradition. If humans wish to be respected, they must prove themselves through combat, not conversation. Thexus turned to face the queen, and his posture was challenging. I request trial by combat, your majesty. Let this human face me in the arena, and we will determine through strength whether his kind deserves consideration or conquest. If he defeats me, I will personally recommend alliance. If he falls, then we launch the invasion as planned. The throne room erupted in clicking sounds of approval, and Chen realized the military caste had been waiting for exactly this moment. They wanted a justification for war, and Thexus had given them the perfect setup. Either the human would die and validate their aggressive stance, or he would somehow win, and they would have to accept an uncomfortable truth about human capability. Queen Valara looked between her military commander and the human diplomat, and Chen could see her calculating the political implications. If she refused the challenge, it would appear weak. If she accepted it, she was gambling her entire military policy on a single combat outcome. Kira moved to Chen's side, and her voice was urgent. You don't have to accept this, commander. It is a trap designed to either kill you or force you to kill Lord Thexus, which would make alliance politically impossible regardless of the outcome. Chen looked up at the massive Velaran warrior who stood nearly 10 feet tall in full combat, armor with energy weapons and enhanced strength systems. Then he looked at Queen Valara, who stood unarmored and vulnerable for the first time in decades. He thought about all the humans throughout history who had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway because retreat was not an option. I accept the challenge, Chen said, and his voice carried across the throne room. But I do so with one condition. I will fight Lord Thexus to prove human capability, but I will not fight to kill. If I can defeat your greatest warrior without taking his life, then perhaps your people will understand that human strength comes not from how many enemies we destroy, but from how many former enemies we can turn into allies. Thexus laughed, and the sound echoed like grinding metal. The human wishes to show mercy in combat. How very soft. I will enjoy teaching you that mercy is just another word for weakness before I crush you in the arena. Queen Valara raised her hand, and her voice cut through the aggressive clicking. The challenge is accepted. Tomorrow at dawn, Commander Chen will face Lord Thexus in the arena. If the human survives and demonstrates capability worthy of respect, then I will reconsider the invasion plans. If he falls, then the fleet launches as scheduled in human colonies. We'll learn what happens when soft species challenge warrior empires. She looked directly at Chen, and something passed between them that might have been respect, or might have been warning. You have gambled everything on this combat, Commander. I hope your human adaptability extends to fighting opponents who were bred for war. Because Lord Thexus has never lost a battle, and he has killed challengers from a dozen different species. Tomorrow, you will either make history or become another lesson about the dangers of arrogance. Chen nodded and tried not to think about how many ways this could go catastrophically wrong. He had one night to prepare for a fight against an opponent who was bigger and stronger and better armed. One night to figure out how to win without killing, because if Thexus died, the Alliance died with him. One night, to prove that humanity deserved cooperation instead of conquest, as the throne. Room emptied and warriors filed out discussing tomorrows. Entertainment Kira stayed beside Chen, and her voice was quiet. I hope you have a plan, human, because if you die tomorrow, I will have to watch the invasion fleet destroy your colonies, and there will be nothing I can do to stop it. Chen smiled, but it was a tired expression. I have a plan, princess. It just involves a lot of pain and a little bit of that human stubbornness that terrifies your mother. Let's hope adaptability and improvisation are enough when facing someone who has trained their entire life to kill efficiently. Ash, Part 5. The Treaty of Two Worlds. The combat arena was ancient and massive, with walls that rose 100 feet into the purple sky of Meridian Prime. Chen stood at the center of the sand-covered floor and looked up at the thousands of Velaran citizens who filled the viewing platforms. They had come to watch either a human prove himself worthy or die trying, and their clicking sounds created a constant buzz of anticipation. Lord Thexus entered from the opposite gate, and the crowd erupted in aggressive clicking that sounded like approval and bloodlust mixed together. The Velaran commander wore full combat armor that gleamed black in the alien sunlight, and energy weapons were integrated into his arm guards. He stood at least 10 feet tall, and his forearms moved independently as he tested his equipment. Every movement screamed lethal efficiency and decades of combat training. Chen wore only basic protective padding and carried no weapons. He had spent the night studying Velaran anatomy and combat techniques with Kira's reluctant help, and his plan was risky at best. The princess now sat in the royal viewing box beside her mother, and Chen could see worry in her posture despite the distance. Queen Valara stood and raised one massive hand, and the crowd went silent. Her voice carried across the arena through amplification systems built into the ancient walls. This combat will determine the fate of human colonies and the direction of Velaran military policy. Commander Chen has chosen to face Lord Thexus without lethal weapons to demonstrate that human strength lies in capability and restraint rather than in domination. Lord Thexus fights to prove that warrior tradition and military power deserve respect above diplomatic negotiation. Let the arena judge which philosophy has merit. The queen lowered her hand, and the combat began immediately. Thexus moved with terrifying speed for something so large, and his opening attack was designed to end the fight quickly. All four arms swung in coordinated patterns that would have crushed Chen if any of the strikes had connected. But the human was already moving, and he had learned in the wasteland that survival meant constant adaptation and unpredictability. Chen rolled under the first swing and came up inside Thexus's guard, where the longer reach became a disadvantage. He struck at an armor joint near the Velaran's knee with precise force, and the commander stumbled but did not fall. Thexus swung again, and Chen took the hit on his shoulder while simultaneously targeting another joint. Weakness in the elbow armor. The crowd's clicking intensified, as they realized the human was not trying to overpower his opponent, but instead was systematically attacking the weak points in armor and anatomy. It was a strategy that showed technical knowledge and patience, rather than aggression. In the Velaran, warriors recognized it as sophisticated combat theory. Thexus activated his energy weapons, and beams of concentrated power lanced across the arena floor, leaving scorch marks in the sand. Chen moved constantly and used the terrain and his smaller size as advantages. When the Velaran tried to corner him, Chen climbed onto the arena walls and jumped behind his opponent. When Thexus tried to use his superior strength, Chen redirected the force and let momentum work against the larger fighter. The battle continued for 20 minutes, and Chen took dozens of hits that would have killed most species. His ribs cracked, and his left arm hung useless, and blood ran from cuts across his face and torso. But he kept moving and kept adapting, and kept targeting the joints and weak points in Thexus's armor with stubborn persistence. Every human ancestor who had refused to quit an impossible circumstances was with him in that moment. Thexus was slowing down, and the crowd noticed it. The commander had allocated too much power to his weapons early in the fight, and now his armor systems were failing. His movements became sluggish, and his breathing was labored even through the environmental support systems. He had trained to fight opponents who would be quickly overwhelmed by superior firepower and technology, but Chen was not overwhelmed. Chen was enduring. Finally, Chen saw his opening when Thexus overextended with all four arms, trying to grab the human in a crushing hold. Chen dropped low and swept the Velaran's legs with a technique that used the commander's own weight against him. The massive warrior crashed down onto the arena floor, and his damaged armor locked up completely, leaving him immobilized. Chen stood over his fallen opponent, and the crowd went completely silent. He was bleeding and broken and barely able to stand, but he had won the combat. Now came the moment that would determine everything, because he could kill Thexus and prove human. Lethality, or he could show mercy and prove human philosophy. The human extended his hand down toward the fallen Velaran commander, and his voice carried across the silent arena. "I could end this now, Lord Thexus, but that would only prove I am capable of killing. Instead, I offer you my hand and an opportunity to stand together. Because humans judge strength not by how many enemies we destroy, but by how many former enemies we can turn into allies." Thexus stared up at Chen from behind his helmet, and for a long moment, nothing happened. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath and wait for the Velaran commander's response. The clicking sounds were gone, and the silence was absolute. Then, Thexus reached up with one massive hand and grasped Chen's extended arm. The human helped pull the commander to his feet, and the Velaran stood looking down at him with an expression that might have been confusion or respect, or both. Thexus removed his helmet, and his mandibles clicked softly in what Chen had learned was a sign of thoughtfulness. "You defeated me, human," Thexus said, and his voice was loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You broke my armor and exhausted my power systems using nothing but adaptation and tactical knowledge. Then you offered mercy when you could have taken my life and claimed total victory. That combination of capability and restraint is something I have never encountered in any opponent." The commander turned to face Queen Valara in the royal viewing box, and his posture was formal. "Your Majesty, I recommend immediate alliance protocols with human colonies. Any species capable of such combat skill, combined with such philosophical restraint, deserves respect, not conquest. I withdraw my support for the invasion and pledge to serve any military cooperation that results from successful negotiations." Crowd erupted in clicking sounds that were confused and amazed and argumentative all at once. The military caste had just watched their greatest warrior not only lose but endorse the very alliance they had been prepared to fight against. Chen swayed on his feet, and Kira was suddenly there supporting him before he collapsed. "You insane human," she said quietly, while medical personnel rushed into the arena. "You gambled your life on philosophical demonstration, and somehow it worked." Chen managed a weak smile. "Not philosophy, princess. Just basic human survival strategy. We learned a long time ago that making friends is easier than making enemies and usually keeps you alive longer. Though I admit this particular friendship negotiation hurt more than most." Queen Valara descended from the royal viewing box and walked across the arena floor toward Chen, and the gathered crowd went silent again. She looked at the injured human, and then at her military commander who stood beside him, and something fundamental shifted in her expression. "I spent decades hiding my scars and building military power because I feared another species would destroy us like we were almost destroyed before," Valara said. "I looked at human adaptation and saw the threat of those ancient enemies repeating their conquest. But Commander Chen showed me that adaptation can mean cooperation instead of domination. That strength can include restraint instead of just overwhelming force." She turned to address the entire arena, and her voice carried weight that went beyond mere volume. "The invasion of human colonies is canceled. Meridian Prime will establish formal alliance protocols with Earth's Galactic Council. We will combine Velaran technology with human adaptability to create a partnership that benefits both our species. And we will remember that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about others based on our own fears." Crowd's clicking sounds were Mixed and Chen knew that cultural change would not happen instantly, but Thexus stepped forward and added his voice to the Queen's announcement. And when the military commander supported alliance, the warrior caste began to shift there. Position Chen spent the next week recovering in the palace medical facilities while diplomats from Earth arrived to formalize the treaty. Princess Kira visited him daily, and they worked together on the details of military and scientific cooperation between their species. The Velerans would provide advanced shield technology and manufacturing capacity, while humans would share their environmental adaptation techniques and exploration strategies. On his final day before returning to Earth, Chen stood in the throne room one last time, and Queen Valara approached him without her ceremonial armor. She looked more relaxed than he had ever seen her, and the scars on her chitin were visible to anyone who looked. "You changed my empire, Commander Chen," Valara said quietly. "My daughter now speaks openly about cooperation instead of just conquest. My military commanders are planning joint training exercises with human forces. My scientists are excited about sharing research instead of hoarding it for military advantage. All because one human refused to be intimidated and chose to show vulnerability as strength." Chen smiled and gestured at his own healing injuries. "I was terrified the entire time, Your Majesty. The wasteland could have killed me. Lord Thexus could have killed me. I gambled everything on the hope that your people would recognize the difference between confidence and arrogance and between mercy and weakness. I am just grateful the gamble paid off." Kira escorted him to the transport ship that would take him back to human space, and her mandibles clicked in the pattern Chen now recognized as affection. "You will return to visit, won't you, Commander? There is still much I want to learn about human culture and philosophy, and your terrible habit of turning impossible situations into diplomatic victories." Chen laughed, and the sound was genuine. "I will return, Princess. Someone needs to make sure your mother does not change her mind, and someone needs to continue teaching you that the most dangerous weapon any species possesses is the willingness to understand their opponents instead of just defeating them." The transport lifted off from Meridian Prime, and Chen looked down at the alien world that had almost killed him. Several times over the past weeks, he thought about all the humans throughout history who had faced impossible odds and survived through adaptation and cooperation and stubborn refusal to give up. He was just one more human in a long line of survivors, and he had done what humans always did when facing extinction. He had found a way to turn enemies into friends. 3 months later, Earth Command received a transmission from the Galactic Council, and the news spread quickly through human colonies. 12 other aggressive alien civilizations had requested immediate diplomatic meetings after seeing what happened when the Velaran Empire made peace with humanity instead of war. They wanted to understand how one unarmed human had changed an entire military culture, just by taking off his armor and showing his scars. "Commander?" Chen read the report and smiled, because that was exactly how humans survived in a galaxy full of species that underestimated them. They adapted and endured and cooperated, and when absolutely necessary, they fought with the same stubborn determination that had carried them through ice ages and asteroid impacts and millions of years on a death world that tried to kill them every single day. The Velaran Alliance became a model for human diplomatic strategy across the galaxy, and the joint exploration fleet they created discovered 17 new habitable worlds in its first year of operation. The ships combined Velaran technology with human crew, and the results exceeded all projections, because it turned out that combining different strengths was more effective than relying on any single advantage. Princess Kira eventually became the head of Velaran Diplomatic Corps, and she spent decades teaching her people that fear could be transformed into cooperation if both sides were willing to show vulnerability. Queen Valara ruled for another 30 years and never wore her ceremonial armor again, because she said that hiding scars meant hiding the lessons that made survival possible. And Commander James, Chen became the most requested human diplomat in the Galactic Council, because he had proven something that humans had always known, but other species needed to learn. The strongest creatures in the galaxy were not the ones who never showed weakness, but the ones who showed their scars and kept moving forward anyway. That was the lesson of Earth, and the gift that humanity brought to the stars, and it changed the galaxy one alliance at a time.